Hello team, welcome to another ATP Geopolitics video with myself, Jonathan MS Pitts. Ukraine War news update, first about there for the 30th of June 2024. Sorry this is a bit late. I've just been on a live chat with Erland from Turkey. Fascinating, he's just got back from Ukraine, delivering a vehicle out there. And my goodness, he's got some interesting stuff to talk about. We are due to have a live stream chat about his experiences, hopefully with Daniela from Tochny as well, because he started a fundraiser. But most of what he experienced, he can't talk about. But it's all like super fascinating. So that's why I'm a little bit late to this morning. Anyway. What do we have from the Ukrainian general staff figures for the Russian losses for the day before? All the usual caveats for these are below in the video. Check that out in the description. Now, 1,140 personnel lost is a fairly high number, pretty much where we've seen it over the last 2 weeks, fluctuating around sort of the low thousands to about 1,250 odd. Somewhere around that. So that's what we would expect. 7 tanks is just a pit below average. 19 armored personnel vehicles is a bit above average, and 53 artillery systems is about 3 times the daily average. 1 multiple launch rocket system and 2 anti-aircraft warfare systems lost there. That could be significant. The Russians have been losing a fair amount of anti-aircraft warfare system, although there have been days where they don't lose any, but these are much rarer things to find and destroy. That's good news because the Ukrainians, as we saw yesterday, might have lost an S-300. 75 vehicles and fuel tanks is a very high number in that category, and 12 pieces of special equipment is also fairly significant. So a heavy day for the Russian losses in a number of different categories, and at the very least, it's an average day, like for tanks. And multiple launch rocket systems, okay, a pip under, given there's only 1 versus what the average would be probably about 2, 2 would be about 3. Anyway, you get the idea. Now, when we go to Andrew Perpetua's loss list, and he's got quite a bit to say about this. So before we look individually at stuff, as you can see, there's a huge amount of surveillance and comms equipment in the Russian losses, and that might skew your sense of numbers there when we often concentrate on combat vehicles. So he says, 59 Russian losses to 20 Ukrainian losses. That's 3-1. That's what you'd like, but actually 22 are combat assets to 7 Ukrainian combat assets, actually. So of the Ukrainian losses, most of them are civilian and other losses. So actually that is a 3-1 advantage. So both those stats are looking fairly good. Although the Ukrainians do have a radar destroyed, so that's a bit of an issue there. Now, he does say there was a ballistic missile strike, and I'm going to show you that later, on a Ukrainian freight train transporting multiple pieces of equipment. This is a bit of a worry, quite a bit of chat about this on the socials. So you've got a train with loads of stuff on being hit by Iskander missiles. The strike destroyed at least 1 vehicle. It looks like an MRAP. There may be more. The primary impact is damaged freight cars full of goods rather than ones transporting vehicles. I'm uncertain about the nature of the transported items or the extent of damage to surrounding vehicles. There's also a video showing a large number of Russian losses in the background. We have yet to geolocate the footage and cannot tell if the vehicles are new, old, or previously known. They are kept off the list for that reason. There are 14 such vehicles, so there could be another 14 Russian vehicles on top of this, and there could be at least another 1 Ukrainian vehicle because of that train, although some saying on the train far more got taken out than just that 1. And he says, and 1 more Ukrainian vehicle falls into that same category where they're still checking it. So it gives you an idea that the Russians might have lost a bunch more. But if we look at the Ukrainian losses, the big thing here is a 79 K6 Pelican radar taken out by Lancet. Lancet's again hitting those targets in the medium range and still doing significant damage, in this case, a radar system. Ukrainians losing a fair amount of radar and air defense capability. Well, I say a fair amount. It's just what they've lost a number of radars recently. That much is true. And then if you include that S-300, then that's bad news. N777 artillery, AHS Crab, and another SPG. 2 Lancets there. So if you look at the first five things, 3 of them are taken out by Lancets. So that tells you something. Then into the infantry fighting vehicle, we've got a Bradley. Then into the APCs, Humvee and a Senator. an MRAP, some kind of MRAP taken out in the Iskander M strike. So that train has been included on here. Just to reiterate what I've said quite a lot recently, is a lot of a large proportion of the Ukrainian losses are Western provided vehicles these days, due to them presumably having cycled through their old Soviet era equipment. Now, when we come on to the Russian stuff, okay, right. First thing to note is we've got 2 Tor M2 air defense systems and 1 Buk M1 M2 air defense system. So that is really good news for the Ukrainians. And interestingly, taken out by Ram drones, and we're going to see that in a second, because they are being taken from a montage of Ram drones being used there. These are, I guess, kind of Lancet equivalents. They're different configurations to the Lancets, but they that same kind of medium range, and it's the Ukrainians' attempted answer to the Lancet, or one of their options, and it seems to be doing fairly well. Surveillance and comms equipment then taking up an awful lot of the list here, most of it destroyed, and it presumably comes from a single piece of FPV drone footage. And I don't know if that's one unit really hammering surveillance and comms equipment, or that's a surveillance and comms footage taken from lots of units. Who knows? Artillery. It's just really interesting speaking to Erland about drones and what's going on there, and the challenges both sides have with electronic warfare. And actually, it's not particularly high tech. There's just a lot of fairly on and off switch low tech stuff going on. And part of the problem is there's just been a new unit created, hasn't there? An unmanned unit in the government that will hopefully be upskilling the electronic warfare capabilities of the Ukrainians. But they do already have a unit that should be doing that, a governmental unit. So I don't know exactly what's going on there, but it seems like more often than not there's electronic warfare within units, rather than like a massive separate electronic warfare. I'm not talking about governmental unit here. I'm talking about military unit. There's just not enough people in that to be able to do all the work, and so the units have to, the individual kind of battalions, brigades, down to kind of, I guess, squads, are having to do their own electronic warfare work, and that's just makes it challenging. But it's the same for the Russians as well, and so a lot of it's to do with this, I guess it's a cat and mouse game of trying to get your units, your FPV drones to have the most optimal success rate. And indeed, the numbers he was saying from the units he was speaking to, Erlen, were pretty good. You know, there's some good success rates, higher than I thought there would be. BM-21 Grad, multiple launch rocket system taken out there. We've got some other artillery systems. We've got infantry fighting vehicles, BMPs and BTRs and whatnot. MTLBs, all sorts thrown in there. So the usual array of equipment. 80 some Desert Cross 1000-3s thrown in, other civilian, or lots of civilian vehicles there, and then a whole range of how these things are destroyed. But FPV drones or night vision drones seem to be the greatest cause for the Ukrainians, with a few Ram drones thrown in. Now, just another random bit of an anecdote. This is an anecdote here from David D, and take his claims with a pinch of salt. But he's trying to respond to one of the biggest disinformation handles on Twitter, Aiden or Squatsons. He says Russia is either maintaining its combat capabilities in Ukraine, or this is Western cope, and Russian forces are actively growing. I'd like to see the 30,000 casualties a month when they get a chance, but perhaps that includes contract expirations. And David D says to that, Scotty, which is Squatsons here, I figure that I'm seeing no more than 20% and probably far less of the losses that are happening on the Russian side. I took a day and counted all the Russian deaths I could see here on Twitter. It's quite macabre, but in about 16 hours, just 16 hours, it hit nearly 400 troops. Yep, 400. So he saw, and I see an awful lot of death and destruction on Twitter, and it's horrific. But if I was to sit down and say, right, how many people can I see dying, that a bit like what Tochny do in terms of vehicles, what geolocated footage can we assess to add to a list of losses that we know is not replicated footage, that we know is different, original, etc., and then we can work out what is lost on a daily basis. Well, essentially what David D is saying here is, I've done this on a personnel front where I've looked at footage over a 16-hour period, and I've found at least 400, or nearly 400 people. Yep, 400. So saying that Russian losses can't be 30,000 a month is just nuts, and we are not even counting losses in training, accidents, guys that get raped and discharged, people that are too old, people that get sick and die, etc., etc. This is just combat losses, and that is a very, very well. If that is representative, then that's significant. It's on point, and it does go towards this idea that they are losing this many people. So if the Ukrainians are claiming, right, 1,140 people have died, been wounded, deserted, or been captured, and then some random guy says, well, in this 16-hour period, I found 400, then, it's not unrealistic. Anyway, Russian female prisoners are already on the front. So this is something we'd heard rumored that they'd been to one female prison and recruited. So the question is, as I've said to you before, I will repeat myself. So is this what you would expect if Russia were in a good situation? And, what hypothesis does this data better support? Does this better support that everything's going fine, Russia aren't losing too many people, they are easily mobilizing enough people, recruitment's all right? Does this data support that, or does it support, oh crap, Russia, we're in trouble here, we've cycled through all the recruits we can get from male prisons, we're nicking as many people from abroad as possible, now let's start thinking about getting female prisoners because we're screwed and because we're desperate for people for the front line? Does it better support that hypothesis? You can look at it from the other way, like I often say. Like, if I was to predict where Russia would be if the war was going really well after 2.5 years for Russia, like if I sat at the beginning of the war and said, what would the war look like in 2.5 years' time if Russia were on point and doing a really, really good job? Would it be this situation right now, which is a grinding assaults to try and take the odd 100 meters here, a kilometer there, with massive amounts of losses, of which a large proportion of them are visually confirmed, and where they're starting to recruit female prisoners? What would I have predicted, and what does it look like now? And I think these data points are important. In the direction of Yasno-Brodivka, our positions were stormed by a detachment of female convicts. They were destroyed. Please be careful. If they are already at the front, then they can almost 100% be in the rear as well. They will mow under the itchy front woman who will come into the yard at night and send you to an eternal sleep. I'm quite sure what all that means. Now, this could be psyops, or it might just be genuine. And if it's genuine, I think it shows that the Russians are in a spot of bother in terms of recruitment. Right, now this is the RAM strike drone footage I was talking about. Is a minute 10 compilation where 2 Tor M2 SAMs and 3 Pantsir S1s and 1 Buk air defense system were taken out. Now 3 of those, the Pantsirs we'd seen previously and was on other footage, and so that's why that's not included. But the 2 Tor M2s and a Buk there from these RAN drones, this bit of footage has made Andrew Perpetua and his team go, right, okay, we haven't seen those 3, let's add that to the list. And so this is how it works. So interesting that the RAM drones are doing their thing. That's good news. I won't show them to you, but you can check out the links. They're all in the description below if you want to go and look at this footage. I just unfortunately can never show it to you because I get restricted. Anyway, here we have the 63rd Mechanized Brigade destroying 10 Russian tanks and infantry fighting vehicles near Crimea. Crimea is one area where the Ukrainians are counterattacking and having some success at the moment. And here you can see drones taking a toll on Russian heavy equipment. Can't. There's not. Yeah, there you go. Yeah, they are doing a good job there for the 63rd Mechanized Brigade. So that's 10 bits of kit. So again, going back to, well, are these figures realistic? Well, just with one unit there are 10 tanks and infantry fighting vehicles destroyed in one general area. So then multiply that across the whole front line. Then we have this. This is a fascinating bit of footage. 2 minutes of an assault by Russians with two APCs that attack. One gets immobilized, another drives along and stops next to it, or gets immobilized next to it. I think it stops, and they get absolutely hammered. And it looks like they're getting hammered primarily by the Bushmaster cannon on a Bradley infantry fighting vehicle. You don't see it, but that's a claim. But also, as it says, Bradley's drones, artillery, mortars. So then a bunch of them are down, and then a drone just lands in the middle of them. And this is quite incredible because it shows you that combined arms defensive activity of the Ukrainians here, where you've got an infantry fighting vehicle, you've got drone teams, you've got artillery and mortars, and then you've got small arms fire, is what's assumed here. So Spartan News there, the graphic content, and maybe candidates for the worst Russian assault of the war. This one is now nominated as well. There are many candidates, he says, sorry. It looks like 2 APCs and a couple of dozen Russians attempted to take on all of those things, and they came out on the wrong side. A Russian unit was ambushed by drones with heavy losses, says the original source. That's worth looking at to see how these things can go. And goodness me, I wouldn't like to have been one of those assaulting there. Just they are getting hammered from all sides, from all directions, up, sideways, and whatnot. It's pretty horrific there. Now in the Zaporizhia Oblast, here we have an FPV drone chases down a coke cage equipped, fully loaded Russian Grad. So there's a multiple launch rocket system, could well be the one that is listed. Where is it? Here we've got that Grad destroyed FPV drone. It's almost certainly this one, and it goes up big time. The drone takes out the Russian MRL and causes a catastrophic ammunition detonation. So there you go if you want to look at that. And then HIMARS here. Now I've got 2 videos and I think they're different. And they are, oh no, this is from November. Rob Lee does that where he does a thread. So the latest one probably is the same one. Archive footage. No, actually these are all different. However, what's interesting about all this is, actually that goes to what I was saying anyway. So yesterday some footage came out of HIMARS targeting and destroying Zala and Lancet drone operators in the Donetsk region, right? And so I've talked about how dangerous these medium-range drones are, the Lancet drones that go to do that, or how dangerous the Iskander missiles are. So, for example, that train that's just been taken out, and we'll see that in a second, by an Iskander missile. And you're thinking, well, you know that those Iskanders aren't going to be striking, and these drones aren't going to be striking if it wasn't for the reconnaissance done by Zala and other Supercams and whatnot. As a result, the Ukrainians no doubt are saying, well, how do we mitigate against this? We need to destroy the reconnaissance. Without the reconnaissance, they get no targets. They can't acquire targets. So actually the key possibly here is taking out the reconnaissance drones, and not just the drones, but taking out the drone teams. So you lose maybe a drone or 2, the vehicle that carries them, and maybe some vital equipment, but you also lose that expertise. So this is what you see here, destroyed a Zala and Lancet drone operators in Donetsk. So you get them taken out by HIMARS. You're thinking, HIMARS, this is a fairly expensive way to take out what might be kind of minimal value. No. Like we said so many times, the value of these targets is what they can bring about. So if this brings about an Iskander destroying a train full of Ukrainian equipment, then that's worth millions and millions and millions. So it's the opportunity cost of not destroying these teams. So this is exactly the sort of target you would want HIMARS to be hitting. This is really high value. And you can see that this is part of a systematic attempt to do this across time. So Rob Lee's thread here is all the times you've seen these HIMARS teams, these HIMARS teams take out the Lancet and the reconnaissance drone operating teams and infrastructure. Right, just to give you a bit of a correction from yesterday from my claims, like I like to do if it's relevant and interesting. I made a claim about spotting with drones, spotting for artillery, and saying it was in a quite an analog way. You got that Max Pro driving through Chassis VR, and they're trying to spot it and say it's at this coordinate, it's there, like it's going to be there, it's driving at this speed. Okay, try and hit it there, and it's a bit like run the gauntlet. And someone was saying actually it's a bit more modernized than that. I'm not to say that it's going to be hugely more success. I mean, it was what it was there, which is still running the gauntlet and still a Max Pro, not getting hit by all of those things, but it is still a more modernized process. So this is from let's just have a look here. This is from iCouron, I think, saying, I noticed that your explanation of how Ukrainian drone operators assist artillery targeting may have inadvertently portrayed the process as more analog and less sophisticated than it actually is. Let me clarify how the Ukrainian system really works and compare it to how the Russians might still operate. So it could be that the Ukrainians, the implication here is that they might have a slightly better targeting process than the Russians. I can't speak to that. How you described it, you mentioned the Ukrainian drone operators track targets and predict the future positions, relaying information to artillery units to adjust their aim. This involves calculating where the target will be in 30 seconds, then coordinating artillery fire to hit the predicted location. While this method can be effective, it relies heavily on manual adjustments and has a high potential for error due to time differences, weather conditions, and shell quality. Yeah. How it actually works. The Ukrainian drone-assisted artillery targeting system is far more modern and reliable. Don't know if the Russians do this as well. So real-time targeting. Drone operators use a button to mark targets directly. This is where AI or computing power comes in. When they press a button, the system displays a light bulb in the middle of the screen, confirming that the targeting location has been sent. Automated adjustments happen. The computer receives these coordinates and continuously updates the shooting solution based on real-time data, including the target's speed, direction, and environmental factors. So I guess if the operator keeps pressing on the target, then it gets more and more data back to the computer, essentially. And then you get high precision. This method ensures highly accurate targeting with constant updates until the round is fired, minimizing the influence of timing differences, weather conditions, and shell quality. Comparison with the Russian methods. Russian artillery tactics often rely more on traditional methods, which can be less precise. They might use similar analog techniques requiring a higher volume of shells, around 10-1, to hit a target due to less accurate predictions and adjustments. The old-fashioned approach contrasts sharply with the modern concert-like coordination seen in Ukraine's use of drones and advanced targeting systems. I can't tell you the number of Russian trolls I've had on my thread saying, you always talk about how the Russians have 10-1, or 5-1 or whatever it is, artillery shell usage advantage, and yet you're saying that most deaths are from artillery, although now they're from drones. Why is it that the Russians are taking more casualties from the Ukrainians? It doesn't add up. And then I have to go into the explanation of stuff like this. So the targeting is poor, the counter battery is kind of non-existent. The Russians just flatten areas. They just send just huge barrages of shelling into areas to try and flatten urban settlements. So it's not about the precision. So the statement is, I forget who it was, which general on which side it was in World War II, I think it was, or might have been after then, which is precision beats mass. In other words, you might have a 10-1 or 5-1 artillery shell usage advantage, but if you're only hitting 1 in every 10 and we're hitting 2 in every 5, then we're going to be better off than you. And that's one of the things. So not only that you have more accuracy, you also have precision guided munitions as well. They were using more of them at the time, Excalibur and stuff like that. The target acquisition was better. The drone usage is better. And then the shell quality is better. Then the barrels are more reliable and better maintained or newer. And then you have as mentioned, the shell quality. So the Russians are getting lots off North Korea and the Ukrainians are getting better quality shells, then that's going to make a big difference. And so on and so forth. And all of these different things come into play so that the Ukrainians are firing fewer shells, but they're having better effect with those shells. Modern warfare, he says, the Ukrainian system represents a significant leap forward in artillery targeting technology. It's not a newly found street bandit improvising on a fly, but rather a well-coordinated concert where every element works in harmony for precise and effective results. In summary, Ukraine's modern approach to artillery targeting, leveraging advanced drone technology and real-time data integration, offers a much more reliable and direct method than traditional techniques, highlighting the contrast between their innovative methods and the more dated strategies that might still be in use by the Russian forces. Best regards. Thank you very much for that. Very interesting. Of course, the caveat there is it could be that Russia is able to utilize that kind of technology and targeting as well. But if they aren't, then there's some kind of asymmetry that Ukraine need to leverage to get greater success and results, which appears to be the case when you look at the size difference between the army, the artillery usage difference between the army, but the supposed difference between casualty numbers. Okay, now there's been some more of this satellite imagery analysis. Wow, it seems that Russia is never running out of stocks. S-300 storage compound in the Far East. So these look like S-300 launcher, maybe all different components to S-300s actually. And it could well be that they have far more S-300 components than one might have thought. As someone says, they may have launchers but short of radars. S-300 launchers are nothing without the radar unit. And this is super on point, that actually they can have 1 million of these, but if you can't find a target, this goes back to Iskander-M. You can have 1,000 Iskander-M missiles to use per day. If you don't have a target, like if you don't have those reconnaissance drones going up, and so there you get back to, well, you can try and destroy the Iskander missiles, or you can destroy the reconnaissance drone teams, and it seems like they're trying to do the latter, the Ukrainians. So PS01 says to this: the beginning of a shortage of missiles for the S-300 air defense system in Russia? ? In the first half of 2022, 88 S-300 missiles appeared from the stationary position of the 108th Anti-Aircraft Regiment of the Russian Air Force, participating in the defense of the Baltimore Air Force Base, 250 kilometers from Ukraine. A similar picture can be seen in other stationary positions during 2022 to 2023. Satellite images are available, but they are often located 600 to 1,000 kilometers from the front line. In general, such a situation leads us to the assumption of the beginning of the shortage of serviceable missiles for the S-300 complexes, Soviet production in the Russian army. The opinion is also supported by the fact that the new ones are not brought to the distant positions from where the missiles were taken. So a bit of confusion there as to exactly where he's going. To me, it looks like they are evidently using them up. There are some differences, but the belief was they had 8,000 missiles at some point last year. So they've got a lot of S-300 missiles. How many launchers they have, I don't know. Evidently, quite a few maybe still. The question is about the radars, really. They have 8,000. So this is someone else going along the 8,000 route. They have 8,000 S-300 missiles and at least 456 S-400 launchers and books and tours. And we know nothing about how many missiles the EU gave Ukraine, so we don't know exactly about Russian SAM success rate. If Ukraine is still deploying S-300s in the field after 3 years, Russia easily has a ton of stocks from USSR and continued production. I don't know about continued production, but again, the argument back against this is, well, if they've got so much S-300 capability, why have they just sent an S-500 to Crimea? Like, you'd only send the S-500 from Moscow to Crimea if you were screwed for other equipment. And therefore, does that come down to, well, it was actually the S-500 radar that they took down there, and it was a radar that was supposedly hit in that strike on Jankoy the other day. And so we get back to the idea that actually the Russians are in trouble with their air defense capacity. Right, moving on to strikes. This morning, Odessa was targeted. A rocket looks to have hit the coastal area south of Odessa. No further information has been released. So that's that Odessa has been targeted. But last night, most of the information has been concerning the strikes within Russia. So Russian media reporting about the alleged downing of 36 drones. Of course, whenever they say they downed 36 drones, it means that they missed most of the drones. During the repulse of a Ukrainian drone attack across 6 regions, specifically 15 drones were downed in the Kursk, 9 in Lipetsk, 4 in Voronezh, 4 in Bryansk, 2 in Oryol, and 2 in Belgorod, which means that no doubt a number of targets will have been hit. And we'll get the information about that filtering through over the next day or two. Additionally, a fire broke out in Nizhny Novgorod at a waste disposal production site affecting an area of 500 square meters. So lots of videos of explosions, sounds of drones, and stuff going on there. If we then, Russian propagandists are complaining about nighttime, quote, massive attack of drones on the Novolipetsk iron and steel works. A total of 7 drones landed and exploded on the plant's territory, and you can hear evidence of that. At night, there was a mass drone attack in Kursk, Belgorod, and Bryansk. There's a big fire here in Nizhny Novgorod. I don't know whether this has anything to do with drone attacks or whether this is a fire that has gone up. This, as mentioned earlier, this might be a waste disposal place, but who knows? It is certainly on fire, that's for sure. And then going on to Ukrainian thoroughness with striking the Russian chemical supply. I don't know if that looks like the same fire at Nizhny Novgorod. In the Russian Terrorist Federation, is the Russian Terrorist Federation on fire today? Nizhny Novgorod, some sort of chemical tanks are burning. Are those waste chemicals? Are they chemicals involved in production? I don't know. But Trentelenko says, maybe, hopefully says, the Ukrainian thoroughness with striking the Russian chemical supply chain will disrupt all sorts of munitions and weapons production. It's how strategic bombing campaigns work. And of course, you can question, whether that is indeed what's happening there. But there are certainly strikes all around Russia last night where you're sure they're going to be trying to hit these kinds of strategic targets. And more videos. These are all linked below of, that's actually one we saw earlier. But of all those places being targeted. Explosions in Lipetsk. Yes, so we'll wait to see what filters through today. But yesterday, it has to be said that the Russians did commit yet another, what I would say is an atrocity. Russian troops attacked the center of the city of Volnyansk in the Zaporizhia region. It was targeted, it was cynical and brutal, says Andrew Perpetua. It was at civilians in the middle of the day off. As of 8:15, 7 people were killed, including 2 children. Another 18, actually it's more than 18 people, including 4 children were injured. It's 36 injured, or 32, 36, something like that. The shelling set fire to commercial premises, households and vehicles. A civilian infrastructure facility was damaged. Thanks to the prompt response of the State Emergency Service, all fires were extinguished. Emergency workers are conducting a search and rescue operation. Police, paramedics, sappers, and other specialised services are also working. It's just pretty horrendous, just slamming ordnance into towns where people are enjoying a day off. Russians sent ballistic missiles into the busy city centre in southern Ukraine today, killing 5 adults and 2 kids every day, on and on, says Jay in Kiev, with someone there reporting on that. Here we have more footage in Vilnius. Number of the injured has increased to 23 actually, as of now it's 36. It just is not cool, and that's the Russians doing what the Russians do. Kiev Independent reporting on that this morning. Bad stuff there. And then Toretsk is still getting hammered. That is on the Donetsk front between between Bakhmut, Chasiv Yar, Bakhmut, and Avdiivka. On the way there, it is just getting hammered, that area now. It's where the Russians have had a little bit of success, capitalizing on a Ukrainian military mistake, I think, or a rotation or something like that. Then they have sort of pushed there, taken some ground, and in so doing thought, right, okay, let's try here. And they've absolutely started hammering the towns around there with ordnance, and Toretsk is getting one hell of a beating. Here you got a babushka.
Ладно, береги вас Господь, давайте.
So here you got, some guy just speaking to a babushka. Just, it is pretty horrendous there. That image, I think, is very powerful of just collapsed buildings, just missiles slamming into buildings, just happening day after day. Right, there's been quite a bit of talk about this due to a Forbes article. A large number of Russian Su-34 jets are on a runway for recently renovated Malyshevo airbase in Voronezh region. Quote, Ukraine could potentially disable the entire operational fleet stationed there if it was allowed to launch such a strike, noted the Ukrainian analytical group Frontelligence Insights. That's Tatarigami's lot. But President Joe Biden's administration has not yet given the Ukrainian government permission to send ATACMS to Voronezh's Malyshevo. And that's reported in a Forbes article. Russia's most dangerous jets are parked in the open 100 miles from Ukraine. Just a bunch of ATACMS missiles sent at that, and you've taken out their fleet of Su-34s. Why is that not allowed to happen? Goodness gracious. It's so frustrating. Right, and then this is kind of M missile I was talking about earlier. Hits a Ukrainian military train at the Ukrainka station in Zaporizhia region, 50 kilometers from the front line. So this is fairly close to the front line, delivering obviously a lot of equipment. Russian sources claim the destruction of M113s, Book M1s, BMP1s, and trucks, but the video quality makes it difficult to confirm. Regardless, the impact is significant. This is the video that Andrew Perpetua said, well, I can just about make out an MRAP that's been taken out. So if you're wanting to see this as a silver lining, then it's not an awful lot of damage has been done to at least mechanized equipment, but damage could well have been, you don't know what is in these cargo. I mean, that's a big explosion, right? So it could be a bunch of HIMARS missiles, and they could be sort of spraying out tungsten right across part of the train. I don't know. But that is a significant explosion at the back of a train. But it's probably unlikely that the Russians are correct in saying all of those bits of kit were taken out, because actually it is just the back of the train, and it will only be those cars there. So it is bad. This is bad, but it's probably not nearly as bad as the Russians are claiming. And of course, that comes down to medium-range reconnaissance drones and the need to take out those drones and their operators. And Euromaidan Press, again, for about the 80 millionth day in a row, we're going to report on the beach situation that there was potential strikes on Belbek Air Base and military infrastructure around this beach, and many Russians were sunbathing on the beach, and lots of shrapnel fell out the sky. The Russians immediately claimed these were American ATACMS that were sent into, that were basically aimed at the beach to kill these civilians. And of course, we discussed all the issues surrounding that. All the evidence now supports that these were air defense missiles that came apart in the air. Different experts, says Euromaidan Press, criticised Western media, including the BBC, The Guardian and CNN, for promoting Russian narratives in their coverage of Ukraine's recent strike on space surveillance facility in occupied Crimea used for targeting civilians in Ukraine. And that's absolutely right. And I think it happens too often where mainstream media outlets, even some of the better ones that are, that have at least some decent protocol for publishing stuff, end up publishing pro-Russian narratives. This happened particularly around the Il-76 cargo plane, when everyone started reporting cargo plane with prisoners of war on, and then it slightly changed to allegedly or whatever. And then like 2 days later, it's like, okay, the Russians claim this, but it doesn't look like that's what happened. It's like, yeah, but for 2 days you went with the Russian claims, and that does the damage, and then that finds purchase with people who are anti-Ukraine, in either voters or politicians in the US, Germany, France, wherever, who then feel justified in their anti-Ukrainianness. And it's really frustrating. It's really counterproductive. So I think mainstream media outlets need to do a better job of working out what narrative is most likely correct. Right up. So, for example, my opinion is that the Ukrainians are not going to be targeting people on the beach, because it's insane to do that. They will lose public support for ATACMSing a beach, right? So that's just doesn't make sense. So if the Russians are saying that, and I'm a mainstream media reporter, I should have in my mind the background knowledge, if you're talking about a Bayesian analysis of probability analysis here. You've got your background knowledge that the Russians lie, that that the Ukrainians are unlikely to be targeting civilians because they want to secure continued support and military aid going forwards. That the shrapnel doesn't look like the hundreds of bomblets that would fall out of an attack, and so on and so forth. You put all this stuff together. I mean, that is the evidence. But your background knowledge is going to be: I live in a world where the Russians lie and the Ukrainians aren't going to be aiming missiles at people on holiday. Just like be a bit thoughtful and then take that into your own probability assessment before you've got any evidence. So before you know of how many bomblets and stuff coming out, when that news was breaking, it's like, okay, it's unlikely to be the Ukrainians aiming at these civilians. So we need to report it carefully with that background knowledge in mind. Anyway, sorry, I haven't even. This is other bits and pieces. So we have more than 14,000 citizens of Ukraine are in Russian captivity, according to Lubinets. 14,000 citizens, that would include, obviously, POWs, but also people who have been arrested prior to the war, people who have also been arrested or taken prisoner by the Ukrainians who've been working in power plants and here and there, men and women alike. It's not all soldiers sitting in Russian prisons. Okay, on that note, now then, when we talk about those prisoners, we can see that they aren't treated very well. So this is a before and after Russian captivity shot here, where Alexander Hrystyuk from Volyn Oblast, Western Ukraine, was returned dead after Russian captivity with his body weighing less than 50 kilograms, bearing signs of torture and brutal beatings, targeted allegedly because he was from Western Ukraine and refused to speak Russian. His head was all bruised, his nose was crooked, and index fingers had no nails. And there you go. That is your Russian torture and the way they treat prisoners. Just leave that one there. I advise you go and watch Sukumimus on his channel. It's a good channel. He looks at satellite imagery of Sevastopol and concludes that there ain't no ships there anymore. Basically, the Black Sea Fleet has got out of Dodge in a major way from Sevastopol. That should be celebrated in mainstream media as a real success for the Ukrainians. Only 3 combat ships remain, he says. The Bayan M and Tarantul corvettes are missing. It'd be really... It was interesting because the other day, similar satellite footage... Well, he's looking at the same one that I was talking about the other day, where people are saying, there's not a lot of Black Sea Fleet in Sevastopol, and then looking at Novorossiysk and saying, well, here are some, but actually there aren't too many in Novorossiysk. But you got to remember, Novorossiysk is a very small port, and it's not as deep, doesn't have as many piers and jetties and dry docks and whatnot as Sevastopol does. It's a very poor cousin for Sevastopol, and so most of the ships have to more out in the sea outside the port, and so satellite imagery would have to catch just the water out there to be able to see where all these ships really are. Now, I did mention this yesterday. This is a rumor that I doubt is true, but some people are saying that, and the quote is, "I had rumours, but here it is. The first strike carried out by F-16s and confirmed by direct contact in the International Legion. We're finally there." Some random bloke saying that they've spoken to someone in the International Legion and F-16s have been used is probably not the best source of truth. But I am going to just tell you that there are rumours circulating that F-16s have been used. I doubt it is true. State Bureau of Investigation will assess Lieutenant General Yuri Sodol's command of Ukrainian troops during the Russian offensive in Kharkiv Oblast. So this was a guy that was removed after one of the chief of staff of Azov wrote a massive diatribe against an unnamed general. Then he was removed by Zelensky the next day, and now he's being investigated by the State Bureau. So possibly he was doing irresponsible things and commanding troops. The Azov guy said he's responsible for the death of more Ukrainians than Russian commanders. So we'll see how that one develops. Ukrainian's IT army, so hackers and whatnot, pivots from targeting Russian businesses to aiding military ops, according to a spokesman who reveals this in an exclusive interview. He claims that the group has disabled Russian CCTV, enabling drone strikes on oil refineries, so on and so forth. So whereas at the beginning of the war, it's like, right, let's try and take down the pensions payment stuff, and let's try and do this, and let's try and do that. Actually, now they are being used to help with actual military operations. So targeting a refinery, the CCTV there, so they can't tell, what's going on with a drone strike or so on and so forth. Interesting. Companies in Russia, supporting the war are targeted by Ukrainian hackers. So on the other hand, that's not to say they aren't still doing stuff like this, which is Ukrainian activists from the BO_team cyber community, in collaboration with experts from Ukraine's main intelligence directorate of the Ministry of Defense, have carried out a round of attacks on Russian companies backing the war against Ukraine. BO team, I wonder, whether they are just striking at deodorant factories and stuff. Who knows? Right. And then Trentelenko talks again, as he likes to, about Russian railway logistics. Keep your eyes open for larger and more frequent Russian train derailments. The life of installed Western roller bearings are ending for more and more Russian locomotives and rolling stock. He talked about this the other day, but I think it was the track that had disintegrated due to heavy rain. But here he's talking about other derailments. This morning, a freight train derailed near Orsk. 6 cement cars derailed, 3 of them overturned. The causes are being investigated. And there you go. Today, it wasn't like crazy techno music, but some random Russian speaking. That's enough from me. Thank you very much for listening. Take care. Speak soon. Sorry it's been so long. Toodle pips.